Hello there, dear dreamer. I'm so glad you're here tonight. It's time to set aside the noise of the day, let your shoulders relax, and let your thoughts drift gently. You don't need to worry about anything right now. Just breathe and allow yourself to sink into the calm of this moment. Tonight, I'll tell you a tale, a folk story from old Germany, a story about a town, a mysterious stranger, a magical flute, and a promise that was broken. So, make yourself comfortable and let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you away. The little town of Hamelin lay between green hills and a winding river. Its cobblestone streets echoed with the chatter of merchants and the laughter of children. But beneath that cheer, something dark scurried. Rats. Thousands of them. They darted across kitchens, gnawed at grain sacks, and even crawled into beds at night. The people of Hamelin grew restless, for no matter how hard they tried, they could not drive the creatures away. The mayor, a plump man with a heavy gold chain around his neck, called the townsfolk to the square. "We must find a way," he declared, "for the rats have stolen our peace." The people nodded, their faces pale with exhaustion. Mothers feared for their children, bakers feared for their bread, and everyone feared for their sleep. It was then that a stranger appeared. He wore a coat of many colors, bright as a rainbow stitched with secrets. His eyes shone with a quiet knowing, and at his side he carried a flute of polished wood. "I can rid your town of rats," he said softly, though his words carried across the square. "But my service has a price." The mayor leaned forward, curious yet wary. "And what price is that?" he asked. The stranger smiled as though he already knew the answer would matter little. 1,000 gold coins, paid in full once the rats are gone." The mayor hesitated, but the crowd was desperate. Cheers rose, and the deal was struck. The man lifted his flute, and as the first note floated into the air, something strange began to happen. The first notes of the flute drifted like morning mist through the streets of Hamelin. The sound was gentle, almost playful, like the whisper of a secret breeze. People paused in wonder, for the melody touched not only their ears, but something deeper, as if it spoke to the heart itself. But the ones who truly listened were the rats. From every corner they came, out of cellars, out of pantries, out from beneath the wooden beams of houses. Their whiskers twitched, their black eyes glittered, and one by one they began to follow the sound. The townsfolk gasped. Never had they seen such a thing. The stranger walked slowly through the streets, playing his flute, and behind him trailed a river of rats, countless and unbroken.
They hopped over barrels, squeezed out of cracks, and streamed like a living shadow behind their piper. Through the market square he led them, past the bakery and the butcher's shop. The townspeople climbed onto steps and leaned out of windows, their fear turning to awe. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, whispering, "He's magic! He's really magic!" The piper's tune never faltered, rising and falling like the current of the river itself. At last he reached the banks of the Weser, the wide river that curved past Hamelin. Without a pause, he walked straight into the shallows, his feet steady on the stones. The rats, as if enchanted, plunged in after him. The waters churned and foamed as the creatures swam, but the melody held them fast. One by one, their small bodies disappeared beneath the current. The people of Hamelin watched in breathless silence as the last whiskered nose vanished into the river. And then, quiet. The flute fell silent. The stranger stepped back onto the shore. Not a single rat remained. The square erupted with cheers, louder than church bells, echoing against the hills. "We are free!" the people cried. The mayor raised his hands, but in his heart a thought had already begun to stir, a thought that would change everything.
That night, the town of Hamelin celebrated. Lanterns were hung along the streets, and music spilled from the taverns as people danced in circles, clapping their hands in joy. The smell of roasted meat and sweet bread filled the air, and for the first time in months there was laughter unshaken by scratching claws in the dark. The children ran freely again, their laughter ringing like silver bells. The bakers carried trays of fresh loaves without fear of gnawing teeth. Even the church bells rang brighter, as if they too rejoiced in the freedom from vermin. Yet amid the merriment, the piper stood quietly in the shadows. His coat of many colors shimmered under the lantern light, but his expression remained calm, distant, as if he were waiting for something. At last, when the laughter quieted, he stepped into the square where the mayor stood with his council. "The rats are gone," the piper said, softly, though his words carried as clear as a bell. "Now it is time for my reward." The mayor shifted uncomfortably, tugging at the gold chain around his neck. His eyes darted toward the chests of coins in the town hall, heavy but dearly guarded. "Ah, yes," he said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "About that reward. Surely you must understand, 1,000 gold coins is rather a great sum, and since the task was not so very hard, perhaps half the amount will suffice." A murmur rose from the council, some nodding, others glancing away. The piper's eyes, once calm, grew darker, like a storm cloud gathering at sea. "A bargain was struck," he reminded them. "The price was agreed. I kept my word. Will you not keep yours?" The mayor puffed out his chest. "The people are free, are they not? The rats are gone. Should that not be enough? Take what we offer, stranger, and be grateful." For a long moment the piper was silent. The wind stirred his coat, and the faintest glimmer of sorrow touched his face. Then, with a slow bow, he whispered, "Very well, but remember, good people of Hamelin, broken promises carry their own music." And with that he turned and walked away, leaving the crowd unsettled, though the bells still rang. The days passed, and Hamelin returned to its rhythm. Merchants opened their stalls, bakers dusted flour across their counters, and children played in the streets with no thought of scratching claws or darting shadows. The town was free, and the people believed their troubles were behind them. Yet now and then someone would whisper of the stranger in the coat of many colors. Where had he gone? What did he mean when he spoke of broken promises? But the mayor dismissed such talk with a wave of his hand. "The man is gone. We owe him nothing more," he declared. "Let us not speak of him again." Still, the memory lingered, like a faint echo in the hills. And late at night, when the streets were quiet, some swore they heard a distant note of music drifting on the wind, soft, haunting, as though the flute had not yet been silenced. Then came the morning of Midsummer's Day. The sun rose bright, the air smelled of flowers and fresh grass, and the church bells rang to call the people to celebration. Mothers dressed their children in ribbons and bright shoes. Fathers gathered in the square, ready for the feast. The air was full of laughter once more. But as the townsfolk rejoiced, a figure appeared at the edge of the square. His coat shimmered in many colors, brighter than before, catching the light like stained glass. In his hands the flute gleamed. The people fell silent. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves, pointing in wonder. The mayor's smile faltered, his cheeks paling as he recognized the man he thought had gone. The piper lifted his flute, his eyes calm yet unreadable. He said no word, but the silence itself seemed to speak louder than bells. Then, slowly, he placed the flute to his lips. The first note rang out, soft, lilting, and unlike the tune that had led the rats away. This melody was lighter, sweeter, filled with joy and wonder. The children's eyes widened, their feet beginning to tap, their faces glowing with delight. And one by one, they began to follow. The melody flowed like sunlight through an open window. It was playful and bright, full of laughter hidden in the notes, as though the flute itself knew the secrets of joy. The children of Hamelin swayed and clapped their hands, their eyes shining as if caught in a dream. One boy spun in circles, ribbons flying from his sleeves. A little girl skipped after him, her braids bouncing. Soon dozens of children joined, their steps in rhythm, their giggles blending with the music. Mothers reached for them, but the little ones slipped free, too enchanted to hear their names being called. The piper walked slowly down the cobbled streets, his flute leading the way. Behind him streamed the children of Hamelin, their voices ringing out like silver bells. The melody wrapped around them like a warm breeze, and nothing else seemed to matter. The mayor rushed forward, shouting, "Stop this at once!" But his voice was drowned in the river of music. He turned to the council, but they stood frozen, unable to move, as though fear held them in place. Through the square and past the church they went, the piper and his dancing followers. Townsfolk tried to block the way, but the children slipped through, their faces aglow, their eyes fixed only on the man in the coat of many colors. The tune grew stronger as they reached the edge of the town, winding through the meadows and up the slope of the hill beyond. Flowers bent gently as they passed, and the grass seemed to shimmer under their steps. At the top of the hill stood a rocky cliff, its face lined with shadows. The piper's flute played a final, rising phrase, clear as starlight. And then, before the townsfolk's eyes, the rocks themselves began to tremble. A hidden passage opened, dark and deep, as though the mountain had awakened. Without hesitation, the children followed him inside, their laughter echoing against the stone. The melody faded as the darkness swallowed them. And then the passage closed. A hush fell over Hamelin. The meadow stood silent, the hill as still as stone. Where moments before there had been laughter and music, now there was only the sound of the wind brushing through the grass. Mothers stared in disbelief, their arms empty, their children gone. Fathers shouted the names of their sons and daughters, their voices breaking against the quiet earth. The mayor stumbled forward, his face pale as chalk. He struck the rock with his fists, calling out, but the mountain gave no reply. The passage was sealed, as if it had never been there at all. Some sank to their knees, weeping. Others wandered the hillside in frantic circles, hoping for another opening, another sound, anything to bring their little ones back. But the only sound was the tolling of the church bell, slow and heavy, carrying grief across the valley. Only one boy remained behind. He was small and limped on a weak leg, unable to keep up with the others. He had tried to follow the piper, but the spell of the music could not carry him far. Now he sat alone in the square, tears wetting his cheeks. Through his sobs he told the townsfolk what he had seen, the mountain opening like a door, and the children vanishing into its depths. The people listened, their hearts breaking, yet still unable to believe. Could it truly be? Could a man with a flute take away nearly every child in Hamelin? And all because of a promise broken? The mayor covered his face with his hands, but in the shadows of his mind guilt whispered. He remembered the stranger's words. Broken promises carry their own music. Night fell heavy over Hamelin. The streets, once alive with laughter, lay empty. No games, no songs, no children's voices to soften the silence. The town, though free of rats, had lost something far more precious. And as the people lay awake, staring into the dark, a question grew louder in every heart. Would the children ever return? The morning sun rose over Hamelin, but its light felt dimmer than before. The town that once rang with laughter now seemed hollow, its cobbled streets echoing only with footsteps heavy with sorrow. Windows stayed shuttered, doors remained closed. Even the birds seemed quieter, as though they too felt the weight of silence. The parents gathered in the square, clinging to one another. Mothers held empty ribbons that once tied their daughters' hair. Fathers carried small wooden toys left behind. Every reminder stung, every memory pressed upon them like a shadow they could not escape. The boy who had been left behind told his story again and again. His words painted the scene with trembling detail. The bright coat, the sweet music, the hidden mountain door. Each time he spoke, the people's grief deepened, for they knew in their hearts it was true. The mayor stood before them, his golden chain dull in the gray light. His voice cracked as he spoke. "This is my fault," he admitted. "I thought only of gold. I broke the promise, and now the price is far beyond what we ever imagined." The council murmured in agreement, shame spreading like wildfire among them. But shame did not bring the children back. Some townsfolk searched the hills, climbing every rock, knocking on every stone, hoping for another opening. Others wandered the meadows, listening for a faint strain of flute music, praying it might lead them once more. But the hills remained silent and the mountain unyielding. At night, the townspeople gathered in the church, candles flickering like stars against the dark. Their prayers rose, soft and desperate, asking for forgiveness, asking for mercy, asking, above all, for their children's return. But no answer came, only the sound of the wind moving through the valley, whispering like a song too far away to understand. And so Hamelin waited. Days turned to weeks, yet the grief did not fade. The story of the man in the coat of many colors became a warning whispered to every ear. Promises broken can never be forgotten. Still, in the quiet of night, some swore they heard a distant tune on the breeze, gentle, haunting, as though the piper was not yet finished with Hamelin. Seasons changed in Hamelin. The green hills turned golden with harvest, then white with snow, then bright again with spring. Yet no matter how many days passed, the wound in the town's heart did not heal. The laughter of children was gone, and without it, Hamelin felt like a song missing its melody. Merchants still sold their goods, and bells still rang in the church tower, but every sound seemed quieter. When mothers walked the streets, they carried silence where once they carried the hands of their little ones. Fathers worked the fields with weary steps, their eyes always drifting toward the hills where the piper had vanished. And so the story began to grow into something larger than grief. It became a tale the elders told in hushed voices, warning the young never to break a promise. For promises, they said, had a music of their own, and if ignored, that music could change the world. Some believed the children lived on, somewhere beyond the mountain, playing and laughing in a land no adult could see. Others feared they had been lost forever, carried away into shadow. No one truly knew, for the mountain never opened again, and the piper never returned. The boy who had been left behind grew older. His limp remained, but so did his memory. He became the keeper of the story, telling it to each new generation, so the town would not forget. His voice was soft but steady, reminding all who listened of the cost of greed and pride. Years later, travelers who passed through Hamelin would sometimes hear the tale. They would pause in the square, listening to the whispers of the townsfolk. Some would glance nervously at the hills, as though half expecting to see a man in a rainbow coat waiting with his flute. And though the people carried on, there lingered always that question, unspoken but heavy in every heart. If the piper's song were to be heard again, would Hamelin ever be ready?
Time has a way of softening memories. Yet in Hamelin, the story of the piper was never forgotten. The town grew older, buildings were rebuilt, markets bustled again, and new families came to live along the cobbled streets. But in every home, in every whispered lullaby, the tale of the children remained. Parents told it at bedtime, their voices hushed and steady. "Keep your word," they would say, "for promises are not to be broken. Remember the music of the piper and the price of pride." Children listened wide-eyed, clutching their blankets tighter, imagining the sound of the flute floating through their dreams. On Midsummer's Day each year, the townsfolk would gather quietly at the edge of the hill. They would bring flowers and place them upon the ground, a gentle offering for the children who had vanished long ago. Some sang hymns, their voices soft against the wind. Others simply stood in silence, their thoughts drifting to what might have been. The boy who had once been left behind grew into an old man. His limp grew heavier, his hair turned silver, yet his memory never faded. Sitting by the hearth, he would tell the story again and again, his eyes distant as though he still saw the bright coat and the gleaming flute. The children of Hamelin, now the grandchildren of those who once wept, would listen in awe, their faces lit by firelight. And so the piper's story became more than grief. It became a lesson carried in every heart, that broken trust can echo louder than bells, and that music once played can never be taken back. Even far beyond Hamelin, travelers spoke of the town and its strange past. The story spread across valleys and rivers, reaching other lands. And with each retelling, the figure of the piper grew more mysterious. Was he a man or something more? A magician, perhaps, or a spirit sent to remind mortals of the weight of their word? No one knew for certain. Only the flute's memory remained, a melody that seemed to linger in the air whenever the wind passed over the hills. Generations came and went, and Hamelin stood quietly by the river, its streets worn smooth by time. Yet still the memory of the Pied Piper lingered, carried like a faint song in the wind. The tale became part of the town itself, woven into its stones, its bells, its very heartbeat. Children grew up hearing it, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts heavy with the warning. And when they grew older, they passed it on, never letting the memory fade. For Hamelin had learned, in the hardest way, that promises broken can change everything. Some said the piper still walked the earth, dressed in colors bright as morning light, his flute ready to play once more. Others believed he had vanished into the hills with the children, guiding them to a land unseen, a place where laughter never faded and songs never ended. Whatever the truth, the people of Hamelin kept the story close, not as a wound, but as a guide. They built their lives with greater care, mindful of their words, mindful of their promises. And though sorrow would always remain, so too did the quiet wisdom left behind. On certain nights when the air was still and the moon bright, some swore they could hear a faint melody drifting over the rooftops. It was soft, distant, like a memory half remembered, a song that carried both sorrow and beauty, a reminder that music, once begun, never truly ends. And so the tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin lived on, not only as a story of loss, but as a gentle voice reminding us to be true to our word, to honor what we promise, and to listen always for the music that surrounds us. And now, dear dreamer, our tale has come to its end. The story of Hamelin and the Piper drifts quietly into memory, leaving us with a gentle reminder of the power of trust and the songs that shape our lives. So close your eyes, let your thoughts soften, and allow the stillness of night to hold you. You have traveled through hills, rivers, and melodies tonight. Now it is time to rest. Sleep well, dear one. May your dreams be calm, and may your sleep be deep and peaceful under the quiet stars.